My name is Scott Harper. I'm 60 years old, retired after 36 years as an HVAC contractor. And until recently I believed I understood exactly what a man's place was inside a family. You worked. You paid your bills. You kept your word. You fixed what broke before anyone else even noticed it was broken. If you loved people, you showed it through consistency instead of speeches. That philosophy had carried me through most of my adult life, and I never questioned it because it seemed to work. At least I thought it did. I lived in a quiet suburb just outside Madison, Wisconsin, where nothing much ever seemed to happen. The streets curved around small lakes and tidy neighborhoods filled with maple trees that turned brilliant shades of orange every autumn. Every Saturday morning someone was mowing a lawn. Every winter someone was shoveling a neighbor's driveway before sunrise. It was the kind of place where people smiled politely at each other in the grocery store but rarely knew what happened behind anyone else's front door. Our house fit right into that picture. Brick exterior, white shutters, a porch swing Diane had insisted we buy during our second summer together. To anyone driving past, we looked like another ordinary family that had quietly settled into middle age. Appearances are generous liars. 16 years earlier, when I married Diane, her daughter Brooke had just turned 10. She was old enough to remember every detail about her biological father, and young enough that I believed there was still room in her life for another dependable adult. I never imagined replacing anyone. I wasn't trying to erase the past. I simply wanted to become part of her future. That seemed like a reasonable goal. Looking back, I realize I spent 16 years confusing responsibility with belonging. They're not the same thing. From the very beginning, I made a promise to myself. I would never force Brooke to call me Dad. I wouldn't compete with another man. Respect couldn't be demanded. It had to grow naturally if it grew at all. So I settled into the role nobody talks about, the quiet man who carries the weight without asking for applause. I was already established in my business by then. Wisconsin summers meant air conditioners failed when people needed them most, and winters guaranteed furnaces would quit during the coldest nights of the year. Emergency calls didn't care about birthdays or anniversaries. I crawled through attics hot enough to steal your breath. I squeezed into crawl spaces barely large enough for my shoulders. I came home smelling like insulation, sheet metal, and engine oil more nights than I could count. Every hour I worked became another brick in the life we were building. Brooke needed braces after her orthodontist explained her bite would only become more complicated if we waited. I never hesitated. We wrote the check before leaving the office. When she discovered she loved music, we found a violin teacher across town. Every Tuesday evening I drove her there, waited in the parking lot for an hour, then drove her home. Sometimes she barely spoke during those rides. Teenagers often don't. I told myself silence wasn't rejection. It was simply growing up. As the years passed, the expenses changed but never stopped. School trips, sports equipment she abandoned after one season, a laptop before high school, another laptop before college applications, SAT preparation courses, application fees, prom dresses, car insurance. Dental work insurance didn't fully cover. The list stretched across 16 years until I could no longer separate one sacrifice from another. They simply became part of life. I never kept receipts for emotional reasons. Money came and went. Family stayed. Or at least I believed it did. People occasionally asked whether it was difficult raising someone else's child. I'd always give the same answer. She's family. Simple. Certain. Final. I meant every word. The funny thing about certainty is how quietly it disappears. It doesn't explode. It erodes. Like water slowly wearing away stone until one day the rock you've trusted your entire life simply gives way beneath your feet. There were moments I ignored because ignoring them seemed easier than confronting them. Whenever Brooke introduced me to new people, she'd usually say, "This is Scott, not my stepdad, not the man who raised me, just Scott." The first few times I noticed, I dismissed it. Teenagers are awkward. Labels can feel uncomfortable. Later, I stopped expecting anything different. Family photographs revealed another pattern I refused to acknowledge. Brooke instinctively stood beside Diane. I usually ended up at the edge of the picture, smiling just the same. During holidays, conversations about childhood memories always circled back to her biological father. Sometimes his name came up with affection, sometimes with frustration. Either way, he remained part of every story. I wasn't. Not really. I existed in the years between memories. When disagreements happened, Diane often tried to keep everyone happy instead of deciding who was right. At first I admired that about her. She hated conflict. She believed peace was worth preserving. Eventually I realized peace and silence weren't identical. More than once, Brooke rolled her eyes after I'd asked her to help around the house. More than once, Diane gently corrected me instead of supporting me. She's had a stressful week. Just let it go. I'll talk to her later. Later rarely came, so I learned another habit. I swallowed disappointment before anyone else had to notice it. The years blurred together. Retirement finally arrived, and for the first time in decades I had nowhere I absolutely needed to be every morning. I imagined slower days, coffee on the porch, weekend trips with Diane, maybe helping Brooke move into whatever came next in her life. I believed we'd earned that future. Then came the therapy appointment. It started like dozens before it. Diane had an unexpected meeting, so I offered to drive Brooke across town. We barely spoke during the drive. She stared through the passenger window while soft music played on the radio. Nothing felt unusual. At the clinic I wished her a good session, took a seat in the waiting room, and picked up an old magazine I'd already read months earlier. About 40 minutes later, the receptionist approached me. "Mr. Harper," the therapist asked if Diane could come in if she's available. I called my wife. She answered immediately. 20 minutes later, she walked through the front door carrying her purse and coffee cup, apologizing for being late. The therapist invited her down the hallway. I stood to give them privacy. I wasn't trying to overhear anyone. I simply stepped toward the exit. Then I noticed one of the office doors hadn't fully latched. A narrow crack. An accident so small nobody else would have noticed. Voices slipped through it with impossible clarity. The therapist asked one quiet question. "How would you describe Scott's role in your life?" There was a brief pause. Not confusion. Not hesitation. Just enough silence for honesty. Then Brooke answered in a calm, almost conversational voice. "He's just a stranger living in my house." My feet stopped moving. I don't remember deciding to stand still. I only remember realizing I couldn't make myself take another step. The words didn't hit me all at once. They settled somewhere deep inside my chest, like cold water slowly filling a room. For a few seconds I convinced myself I had misunderstood her. Maybe there was more to the sentence. Maybe she was describing how she had once felt years ago. Maybe the therapist would challenge her, ask another question, give Brooke an opportunity to explain. Instead, there was only silence. The kind of silence that tells you nobody in the room believes clarification is necessary. Then the therapist spoke again. "Would you say you've always felt that way?" Brooke answered without hesitation. "I guess I have. He's always been there, but he's never really been family to me." Every word arrived calmly, measured, thoughtful. There was no anger in her voice. That was the part one couldn't escape afterward. People say terrible things during arguments. Anger exaggerates. Pride invents wounds that don't exist. But this wasn't an argument. Brooke wasn't trying to hurt me because she didn't even know I was standing outside that partially open door. She wasn't performing for an audience. She believed every word. The therapist let another pause settle before asking the question that changed everything. "Does your mother see it the same way?" A chair moved across the floor. I heard Diane step farther into the office. For 16 years, I had trusted that woman more than anyone else on earth. We'd built a home together, buried parents together, celebrated promotions, survived layoffs, worried about medical tests, planned retirement. Marriage teaches you to believe that when the rest of the world misunderstands you, the person sleeping beside you doesn't. I waited, not because I wanted validation, because I needed to know whether my life had been real. The therapist repeated herself gently. "How would you describe Scott's place in the family?" Diane sighed. It wasn't an angry sigh. It sounded almost apologetic. I think Brooks trying to explain that he was always more of someone who helped us, not husband, not parent, not family, someone who helped us. The therapist asked quietly, "Would you agree with Brooks' description?" Another pause. Long enough for hope to survive. Short enough for it to die. Yes. One word. Barely louder than a whisper. 16 years collapsed into 3 letters. I don't remember leaving the hallway. To this day, I honestly can't tell you how I got outside the building. One moment I was staring at that narrow crack between the door and the frame, and the next I was standing in the parking lot looking at my own reflection in the driver's side window. I looked older than I remembered. Retirement had left silver in my beard and lines around my eyes, but something else had appeared in those few minutes. Recognition. Not of them. Of myself. For years I had been trying so hard not to ask for appreciation that I had accidentally taught everyone around me I didn't need it. Every compromise. Every swallowed insult. Every moment I chose peace over honesty. I'd mistaken silence for strength. The receptionist eventually stepped outside and told me Brooks' appointment had ended. I smiled. I actually smiled. "Thank you," I said. When Brooke climbed into the passenger seat, she looked exactly as she always did after therapy. Quiet, thoughtful, scrolling through her phone before fastening her seatbelt. She smiled politely. "Thanks for waiting." I nodded. "No problem." That was our entire conversation on the drive home. I watched the familiar Wisconsin roads pass by while memories replayed themselves in my head with frightening clarity. Teaching Brooke how to ride a bicycle after she'd fallen twice and refused to quit. Building her science fair display because she had the flu the night before judging. Driving across the state to tour colleges. Standing in long lines during registration. Helping move furniture into her first apartment. Christmas mornings. Birthday dinners. Graduation photographs. Thousands of ordinary moments. I searched every memory for evidence that I had imagined my place in the family. By the time we reached the driveway, I already knew the answer. I hadn't imagined anything. I had simply mistaken gratitude for belonging. The house felt different the moment I walked inside. Not because anything had changed, because everything had. The pictures hanging in the hallway suddenly looked like photographs from someone else's life. The dining room table where we'd celebrated birthdays became nothing more than wood and chairs. Even my recliner in the living room no longer felt like mine. It was furniture inside a house where, apparently, a stranger had been living. Diane came home an hour later. She kissed my cheek. Asked whether Brooks' appointment had gone well. I looked into her eyes. She had no idea what I knew. For one brief moment I considered telling her everything. I imagined the conversation, the apologies, the explanations, maybe even tears. But another thought interrupted me. If I confronted her, she would know exactly which answer had hurt me. Then every word afterward would be influenced by guilt. I didn't want guilt. I wanted truth. And I had already heard it. That evening we ate dinner together. The television played softly in the background. Brooke talked about work. Diane mentioned grocery shopping. I answered when someone asked me a question. Otherwise, I stayed quiet. Neither of them noticed. Or perhaps they did. I couldn't tell anymore. Late that night, after everyone had gone to bed, I sat alone at the kitchen table with nothing but a glass of water and the silence I'd spent 16 years protecting. For the first time in my marriage, I opened the folder where I kept every financial record. Mortgage statements, insurance policies, utility accounts, college payments, medical bills, automatic transfers. Page after page carried my name. Not because anyone had asked me to, because I had simply assumed that's what family did. I sat there until nearly 2 in the morning, reading through 16 years of quiet responsibility. And somewhere between the mortgage statements and Brooks' orthodontic invoices, I reached a decision. I wasn't angry. Anger burns hot. This felt colder, permanent. By sunrise, I knew exactly what I was going to do. I woke before sunrise, not because I had somewhere to be, but because sleep had become impossible. The house was silent in the peculiar way suburban homes are silent before dawn. The refrigerator hummed in the kitchen. A sprinkler somewhere down the street clicked rhythmically across a neighbor's lawn. For 16 years, those ordinary sounds had meant home to me. That morning, they sounded like the background noise of a place where I no longer belonged. I made coffee out of habit. 2 mugs. I stopped halfway through pouring the second one. For a long moment, I stared at the cup in my hand before quietly pouring the coffee back into the pot. Diane would make her own when she woke up. There was no reason for me to continue pretending nothing had changed. That realization came easier than I expected. Not because I had stopped loving my wife, because I had stopped lying to myself. I carried my mug to the back porch and watched the sun climb slowly above the rooftops. Retirement had given me countless mornings exactly like this, mornings I had once imagined sharing with Diane after decades of hard work. We'd talked about traveling through Wisconsin during the fall colors, visiting small towns we'd always driven past, spending lazy afternoons fishing without worrying about the phone ringing with another emergency service call. Those conversations suddenly felt borrowed, like memories belonging to another couple. Around 7 o'clock, Diane came into the kitchen. She smiled when she saw me through the window and waved. I smiled back. The gesture came automatically. 16 years of marriage don't disappear overnight. Your body continues performing familiar routines long after your heart has abandoned them. She stepped onto the porch carrying her coffee. You're up early. Couldn't sleep. You've been restless lately. I suppose I have. She sat beside me on the porch swing we'd bought years earlier. For several minutes we watched the neighborhood wake up. Dog walkers, school buses, commuters backing out of driveways. An ordinary morning. She rested her hand lightly on mine. I know retirement's been an adjustment. I looked down at her hand. She genuinely believed that was the problem. Not because she was cruel, because she had absolutely no idea what I'd heard the day before. I'll figure it out, I said quietly. She squeezed my fingers. I know you will. The conversation ended there. It struck me how easily 2 people can occupy the same silence while living in completely different realities. After breakfast, Diane left for work. Brooke had already gone. The house became mine for the first time in years. Or perhaps it had never been mine at all. I walked through every room without any particular destination. The living room where we'd opened Christmas presents. The dining room where Brooke had blown out birthday candles 16 times. The hallway where pencil marks still measured her height against the wall. Each room held evidence of my life. None of it proved I belonged there. Eventually, I climbed the stairs to our bedroom and pulled a single black duffel bag from the back of the closet. It was the same bag I'd used for overnight service calls when winter storms stranded technicians far from home. Funny how life circles back on itself. I folded clothes carefully. Not many. A week's worth of shirts, jeans, underwear, my shaving kit, prescription medication, a framed photograph of my parents. Nothing else. I wasn't trying to erase 16 years. I was simply taking what still unquestionably belonged to me. Before zipping the bag closed, I looked around the bedroom one last time. Diane's books rested on her nightstand. Our wedding photograph stood beside the alarm clock. My side of the closet was still mostly full. It would remain that way. This wasn't revenge. It wasn't punishment. I wasn't emptying the house. I was leaving it exactly as I'd found it the day before. The only difference was that the stranger would finally move out. Downstairs, I sat at the kitchen table and wrote a note on a piece of lined paper torn from an old legal pad. Took less than a minute. I heard enough yesterday to understand where I stand. I won't argue with your truth. Take care of yourselves. No accusations. No dramatic farewell. No demands for apologies. Just acknowledgement. I folded the paper once and placed it beneath my house key in the center of the kitchen table. The key made a surprisingly loud sound against the wood. A small metallic click. It echoed through the empty house. I stood there longer than I expected. Not waiting for certainty. Waiting for hesitation. None came. I carried my duffel bag to the garage, loaded it into my pickup, and closed the tailgate. Before backing out of the driveway, I looked at the house through the windshield. The flower beds Diane loved. The porch swing. the curtains in the front windows. Anyone driving by would have seen a retired husband heading out for errands. Nobody would have guessed he wasn't coming back. I checked into a small business hotel near the interstate about 20 minutes away. Nothing fancy, just clean carpets, plain furniture, and a clerk who didn't ask unnecessary questions. When she handed me the room key, she smiled politely. Business or vacation? I almost laughed. Something in between. The room overlooked the parking lot. A king-sized bed, a desk, a television bolted to the wall. It felt temporary. That was exactly what I needed. I set my duffel bag on the luggage rack, sat in the desk chair, and opened my laptop. There was one task I had postponed until I was certain. Now I logged into my bank account. The mortgage payment was scheduled automatically, just as it had been for years. One click opened the payment settings. Another highlighted the recurring withdrawal. My finger rested over the confirmation button for nearly a full minute. I wasn't thinking about money. I was thinking about words. He's just a stranger living in my house. If that statement was true, then I had been paying the mortgage on someone else's home. I clicked Cancel Automatic Payment. The screen asked if I was sure. For the first time in 16 years. I answered yes. I stared at the confirmation message until it disappeared from the screen. The mortgage payment had been scheduled so long ago that I barely remembered setting it up. Every month, the money simply left my account without another thought. It had become as automatic as breathing. I never reminded Diane when the payment cleared. I never mentioned the balance dropping from my savings. It wasn't something I considered a favor. It was simply another responsibility that belonged to me, or at least it had. I logged out of the bank website, closed the laptop, and leaned back in the chair. The hotel room was quiet except for the steady hum of the air conditioner mounted beneath the window. Funny how I noticed the sound immediately. 36 years in the HVAC business teaches you to recognize equipment by ear. I could tell from the compressor cycle that the unit had been serviced recently. Some habits never leave you. Others disappear the moment you discover they were built on an illusion. For the next 2 days, I kept my phone on silent. Not because I was hiding, because I already knew what the first conversations would sound like. Where are you? Why did you leave? Can we talk? Questions searching for an explanation that I wasn't interested in giving. They already had one. They simply didn't know I had heard it. Instead of answering calls, I drove without any destination. Retirement meant I had nowhere I needed to report. Nowhere waiting for me except a small hotel room beside the interstate. I found myself taking county roads through southern Wisconsin, passing dairy farms, old red barns, and fields stretching toward the horizon. I stopped for lunch at small diners where nobody knew my name and nobody cared why an older man sat alone staring out the window longer than he looked at the menu. Solitude has a different weight when it's chosen. For years, I'd been lonely inside a full house without realizing it. Now I was alone. There was a surprising difference. During those drives, memories kept arriving without invitation. Not the dramatic moments, the ordinary ones. Teaching Brooke how to check the oil in her first car because I wanted her to know how to take care of herself. Standing in line at a department store one December while buying the winter coat she'd wanted but never asked for directly. Replacing the water heater on a Saturday because I didn't want Diane spending money on another contractor when I could still do the work myself. Countless evenings fixing things around the house after finishing 10-hour workdays. I'd never considered those moments sacrifices. They were simply expressions of love. Looking back from a distance, I began asking myself a question I'd avoided for years. Had anyone ever noticed? Not appreciated. Not praised. Simply noticed. By the evening of the third day, I finally looked at my phone. 31 missed calls. 19 text messages. Most were from Diane. A few from Brooke. Several from numbers I recognized as mutual friends. I didn't open any of them. If people wanted answers, they already had them. Truth doesn't become less true simply because someone hears it unexpectedly. The following morning, my phone rang again. Diane. This time I answered. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Finally, she whispered, Scott, where are you? I'm safe. That's not what I asked. I know. Her breathing sounded uneven. I've been worried sick. I imagine you have. Please come home. Home. The word lingered between us. I don't think that's my home anymore. What are you talking about? There it was. Complete confusion. Not denial. Confusion. She genuinely didn't understand. I heard the therapy session. Silence. Heavy. Immediate. I could almost hear her trying to remember every word spoken inside that office. Then she exhaled. Oh. Just one syllable. Small enough to confirm everything. I wasn't supposed to hear it. I continued. The door was open. Scott. I didn't interrupt. I know. I didn't argue. I know. I simply listened. She began crying quietly. I'm so sorry. The apology sounded sincere. It also arrived 3 days too late. What exactly are you sorry for? I asked. Another silence. Longer this time. I don't know. I think you do. No, I mean. Her voice broke. I don't know how to explain what you heard. You don't have to. It isn't that simple. It sounded very simple. She whispered my name again, but I let the silence answer for me. After nearly a minute she spoke. The mortgage payment failed. I almost smiled, not because I enjoyed hearing it, because I'd been expecting those exact words. The bank called. They said the automatic withdrawals were removed. That's correct. Scott, they'll charge late fees if we don't fix this immediately. There it was. Not, we need to fix us. Not, please come back. The first practical emergency had arrived. Money. I see. Can you log back in and restore the payment? I could. Another pause. But I'm not going to. She inhaled sharply. Please don't do this. I'm not doing anything. You canceled it. I stopped paying the mortgage on a house where, according to your daughter, a stranger lives. You know Brooke didn't mean. I interrupted her for the first time in 16 years. Don't. The word came out quietly, firmly. I heard her. She was trying to explain complicated feelings. And when the therapist asked if you agreed, she said nothing. I heard you too, Diane. More silence. The kind that cannot be repaired with explanations. Late that evening, there was a knock on my hotel room door. I already knew who it would be before I looked through the peephole. Diane stood in the hallway wearing the same blue jacket she'd thrown on countless times over the years, whenever she needed groceries or wanted to walk the dog. Her hair was pulled back carelessly, and her face carried the exhaustion of someone who hadn't slept in days. I opened the door. She took one step toward me, then stopped. For the first time since we'd met 16 years earlier, neither of us knew what belonged in the space between us.